Before we go any further into how my son and his wife uninvited me from Thanksgiving and invited just my daughter-in-law's family, I want to pause and speak directly to you. If you've ever been made to feel invisible, or like your only place was in the background, waiting quietly while others decided if you were included, let me remind you, you are not finished, and you are not forgotten. This season of life is not about being pushed aside. It's about living fully, laughing often, and enjoying the years you've earned. And to help you do just that, I want to share something special. 38 uplifting and funny short stories for seniors. Easy-to-read tales that bring laughter, memories, and mental stimulation. Psychotherapist approved. It's filled with lighthearted, warm, and funny stories written to brighten your day, stir up good memories, and even give your mind a gentle workout. It's easy to read and perfect for reminding yourself that joy and laughter belong in every chapter of your life. So before you hear what happened when I finally decided to stop waiting for an invitation and start building my own table, grab your copy from the pinned comment. And if this message speaks to you, don't forget to hit like, share it with a friend who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more true stories of women standing strong. Because what comes next in my story will show you that sometimes being left out is what leads you to discover your greatest strength. I was sitting at my kitchen table that morning, sipping my coffee the way I always do, looking out at the marsh behind my house in Charleston, South Carolina. The water was calm, the egrets were gliding low, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. At 67 years old, I thought I knew what family rhythm looked like. I thought I knew where I belonged. But sometimes life has a way of shifting underneath your feet when you least expect it. My phone buzzed, face down on the table. I reached for it without much thought, thinking it was one of my cousins reminding me about pies, or maybe my niece Karen asking if I still had Grandma's old cornbread recipe. Instead, it was a message from my son, Donald. It was short. No greeting, no warm words. Just one cold line. Mom, it'll just be Sophia's family this year. Hope you understand. I read it once, then again, and then again, as if the words might change if I stared long enough. They didn't. The letters sat there, sharp and plain on the screen, and each time my eyes went over them, they cut a little deeper. I set my cup down carefully, almost afraid my hand would shake and spill it. I stared at that text until the screen went dark, and still I couldn't make sense of it. Just Sophia's family this year. My son, my own son. The boy I raised, the boy I worked myself to the bone for, the boy I thought would never turn his back on me, had just done exactly that. I didn't answer right away. I wanted to type something, anything. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tell him how thoughtless that message was, how cruel. But my thumb hovered over the keyboard, and nothing came. Words rose in me, broke apart, and then fell away. In the end, I typed only one word. Enjoy. That was it. Just enjoy. I set the phone down on the table. I pressed my palms against the smooth wood as if holding myself steady. From the outside, if anyone had walked into that kitchen right then, I probably looked calm. But inside, my chest was hollow. My heart felt like it was sliding down into that emptiness. The morning sun was coming through the window, lighting up the little things I had set out for the holiday. A bright table runner with autumn leaves, still folded neat. A stack of new serving dishes I'd picked up on sale at Belk's. I'd already started on some of the cooking, testing the sweet potato casserole I planned to bring, perfecting the cranberry relish that always made my cousins smile. All of it sat waiting like I had a role to play. But now it meant nothing. I thought back to the week before, when I had walked through the market with a basket full of gifts. I had picked out a set of kitchen towels for Sophia, even though she never once used anything I gave her. I'd chosen a model train set for my oldest grandson, knowing how he loved watching them in the station downtown. I'd bought a puzzle for the little one, something I imagined we'd sit and do together after dinner while the rest of the family napped off the turkey. I even picked out a new cardigan for Donald, a soft gray one that made me think of how he used to look in his church clothes as a boy. All of that was sitting in the spare bedroom closet, wrapped and ready. I had pictured myself handing them out after we ate, watching the kids' faces light up, maybe even getting a smile from Sophia if she let herself soften for a second. That picture was gone now, replaced by the harsh glow of a single text message. I tried to remind myself I wasn't the only one in the family. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe something had changed last minute. But deep down I knew. I'd felt it for years. The distance, the way Sophia's family seemed to take up more and more space, while I was expected to be grateful for the scraps of time left over. I stood up and walked into the living room, my feet slow on the hardwood. On the mantel sat the photo from last year's Thanksgiving. Everyone crowded together in Donald and Sophia's dining room. I remembered how I was tucked to the side, half behind Sophia's mother. I had smiled like I belonged, but inside I had already felt the truth. I was being edged out. This text just confirmed it. I walked back to the table, sat down again, and stared at the screen of my phone. I imagined Donald writing it. Did he even pause before pressing send? Did he feel the sting it would cause? Or was it just easy for him? Easier than having a real conversation? The kettle on the stove whistled faintly. I poured myself another cup of coffee, though I barely tasted it. My mind ran in circles, replaying every holiday from the past 10 years. The dinners where I cooked half the meal, but watched Sophia's family take the credit. The birthdays where I sat in the corner, quiet while the others fussed over each other. The Christmas when I gave my grandson a quilt I had made, and he thanked Sophia's mother instead because he assumed it was hers. Little cuts, each one small on its own. But together, they had carved a deep wound. And now, here I was 67 years old, with a lifetime of giving, of showing up, of sacrificing. And still, I wasn't welcome at my son's table. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me. My eyes went to the folded table runner again. Bright leaves, cheerful colors, untouched. I reached out, ran my hand over the fabric, and folded it tighter, pressing it flat against the table. My lips moved before I even knew what I was saying. Just a whisper, soft but steady. So I don't have a place at their table. And in that moment, the kitchen felt colder than it ever had before. After I whispered those words about not having a place at their table, I sat there for a long time. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the tick of the wall clock. But my mind wasn't quiet at all. Memories began to surface, one after another, like old photos being pulled from a drawer. I didn't even try to push them back down. They came whether I wanted them or not. The truth is, that text from Donald didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't one single cut. It was the last slice after years of small ones. I thought back to when Donald was little. He was my only child. I worked 2 jobs back then, mornings at the school cafeteria and evenings cleaning offices downtown. I came home tired, but I still cooked him dinner, helped him with his homework, and read him a story before bed. I used to tell myself it would all be worth it, that one day he'd look back and know his mama had been there, even when life was hard. Then he met Sophia. I wanted to like her. At first, I tried. She was polite. She smiled. She talked about her family a lot. But I noticed something early on. Whenever I was around, she had a way of making me feel small. Like my opinion didn't matter. If I suggested a recipe for the cookout, she'd say, "Oh, my mom has a better one." If I brought a gift, she'd say, "That's nice, but we already have something like it." Tiny remarks, but they added up. The first time I truly felt pushed aside was when their first child was born. I drove to the hospital as soon as I got the call. I brought a soft blanket I had quilted by hand, every stitch made with love. When I arrived, Sophia's parents were already there. Her sisters, too. They passed that baby from arm to arm, each taking turns, laughing, crying, taking pictures. I waited, standing in the corner with my blanket folded in my arms. Finally, when everyone else had had their turn, someone handed me the baby for just a minute. I smiled down at my grandchild, but inside I felt the sting. I had waited the longest, even though I was the boy's grandmother too. When I tried to hand over the quilt, Sophia's mother took it and said, "Oh, thank you. He has so many already, but we'll add this to the pile." She didn't even realize it was handmade. It didn't stop there. Holidays became another sore spot. One Christmas, I remember walking in with a tray of deviled eggs. Sophia's family was already seated at the big table, laughing, chatting, plates full. My place was set at the far end, almost at the kids' table. I didn't say anything. I just took my seat and smiled like I belonged, but I felt like a guest in a house where I used to feel like home. Birthdays were the same. Donald used to make a big deal out of mine when he was younger. Even as a grown man, he'd stop by with flowers or call to check on me. But after he married Sophia, things shifted. I remember one year, he forgot mine completely. The next week, though, I saw pictures online of the big dinner they threw for Sophia's father's birthday. A steakhouse meal, balloons, cake, the whole family gathered. I didn't say a word to Donald. I didn't want to sound jealous. But in my heart, I felt it. My place in his life had shrunk. Another memory came to me while I sat at the table that morning. It was a Thanksgiving about 10 years back. I had cooked pies, mashed potatoes, and green beans. I carried them into Donald's house, balancing the hot dishes with care. When I set them down, Sophia's mother walked in right behind me with one casserole. Everyone rushed to thank her, asking for her recipe, praising her cooking. My food was placed at the side without much notice. It was like I was invisible in my own family. And yet, I kept showing up. I kept baking, cooking, buying gifts, sending cards. I told myself that if I gave enough, if I stayed steady, maybe they'd see my worth. Maybe Donald would remember that his mama was always there. But the years rolled on, and Sophia's voice grew louder in his life. I don't think Donald meant to push me aside, not at first. But when one person whispers in your ear long enough, you start to believe them. The Thanksgiving text was just the final straw. I looked around my house that morning, the folded table runner, the serving dishes, the little gifts wrapped in the bedroom closet. I realized I had been preparing not just for a holiday, but for acceptance that was never really coming. And now, at 67, I was left out in the open, told plainly that I didn't belong. I thought about all those years of hard work. The mornings when I packed Donald's lunch before heading to the cafeteria job. The nights when I stayed up ironing his clothes so he could feel proud walking into school. The weekends I spent selling baked goods just to afford his baseball cleats. I remembered holding his hand when his father walked out, telling him, "We'll be okay. We'll make it." And we did. I raised him by myself. I gave him everything I could. Now he had a family of his own, and I was no longer part of the picture. The text wasn't just words on a screen. It was every slight, every forgotten birthday, every moment I was pushed to the edge. It was Sophia's shadow stretching over me until even my own son couldn't see me clearly. I sat there with my coffee gone cold and said to myself, this isn't the first time they've pushed me aside, but it might just be the last time I let it happen without standing up. I didn't know yet what I was going to do. I just knew I couldn't swallow it down anymore. I was still sitting in that kitchen when my phone buzzed again. For a second, I thought it might be Donald, maybe realizing how cold his text had been. But when I flipped the phone over, it was my niece, Karen. I answered, trying to sound normal. Hey, sweetheart. Her voice came through, tight and fast. Aunt Joyce, did you hear? We were cut to. I blinked. Cut to? What do you mean? Thanksgiving, she said, her words tumbling over each other. Donald and Sophia aren't having the whole family. Mom got the same text you did. So did Uncle Jim and Aunt Rose. Even Cousin Michael. 17 of us. All told not to come. It's just Sophia's side this year. I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear. My hand actually trembled. I had been sitting in my hurt, thinking it was just me, thinking maybe it was something personal between Donald and me. But now I understood. It wasn't just me at all. Karen's voice cracked. Aunt Joyce, they didn't even try to explain. Just said it would be smaller. But it's not smaller. It's just only them. I swallowed hard. So her family gets the whole table, and the rest of us get pushed aside. That's exactly it, Karen said. Mom's furious, but she doesn't want to cause a scene. She said to just let it go. Let it go. Those were words I had lived with for years. Let it go when I was put at the end of the table. Let it go when birthdays were forgotten. Let it go when my handmade gifts were brushed aside. I had let so much go that there wasn't much left of me at their gatherings. Karen went on. We thought about trying to do something small at Grandma's house, but you know how tiny her dining room is. It can't hold more than 10 people, and there's no way everyone would fit. I pictured it. Grandma's old house. The walls closing in, the chairs jammed together, people balancing plates on their laps. It wouldn't work. Karen, I said quietly, this isn't about space. This is about control. About who gets to decide what family looks like. There was silence for a moment, then Karen whispered, You're right. That's what it feels like. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the marsh again. The sun was higher now, brighter, but I didn't feel its warmth. Something was stirring inside me, though. A shift, a kind of steady heat building in my chest. Tell me something, I asked her. How did your mom take it? Karen sighed. She's hurt, but she said we should just do our own thing. She doesn't want to give Sophia the satisfaction of knowing she got to her. I shook my head, though Karen couldn't see me. No, this isn't just about Sophia. This is about all of us being told we don't matter. Karen's voice softened. I knew you'd understand. You always do. When we hung up, I sat there with my phone in my lap. I thought about the family members scattered across the city, each sitting in their own kitchen that morning, feeling the same sting I did. 17 people, told with a few cold words that they weren't wanted. And not just strangers, not distant cousins we barely knew. These were people who had always shown up. People who had cooked, cleaned, laughed, prayed together. People who had filled every Thanksgiving table I could remember. And now they were out because Sophia wanted her family front and center. I tapped my finger against the table, slow and steady. That warmth in my chest kept growing. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like shrinking down. I didn't feel like letting it go. Instead, I thought, what if we had our own table? The idea came like a small spark, but once it lit, it didn't go out. I could picture it, not a crowded table shoved into Grandma's little dining room, but a real gathering, a table long enough to hold everyone, a meal that didn't leave anyone standing on the edges. For so long, I had told myself I was powerless, that the best I could do was show up and smile while being overlooked. But maybe I wasn't powerless. Maybe I had more to give than just side dishes and quiet smiles. I looked around my house. My home wasn't huge, but I had more space than Grandma's. And just a short drive away, there was the estate I had inherited from my brother after he passed. A big white house with wide porches, high ceilings, and enough dining space to fit the whole family, and then some. I had never really used it for much beyond the occasional weekend stay, but suddenly It seemed like the answer. For a moment, I argued with myself. You're 67, Joyce. Do you really want to take on something this big? Do you want to stir up trouble? But another voice pushed back. Trouble's already here. They uninvited you. They uninvited everyone. What's left to lose? I stood up and walked to the spare room, opened the closet door, and looked at the gifts I had already wrapped. The train set, the puzzle, the cardigan. They looked back at me like a promise. These weren't just objects. They were reminders that I still had a place, that I still had love to give. And right then, the decision started to form. Not a full plan, not yet, but the seed of one. If Donald and Sophia wanted their perfect picture, with just her family, fine. Let them have it. But I would not sit alone at my kitchen table this Thanksgiving. I would not let 17 other people sit alone, either. I would set another table, a bigger one, a brighter one, a table that proved family isn't about exclusion. It's about welcome. The thought steadied me. It didn't erase the hurt, but it gave me something stronger to hold on to. And as I folded the table runner one more time, I whispered to myself, maybe it's time to make a new tradition. If you believe family should mean everyone has a seat, tap like and share this video now. After I whispered that it might be time for a new tradition, I stayed standing in that spare room for a while. The closet door was still open, the wrapped gifts lined up neatly on the shelf. They looked like they were waiting for a celebration that might never come. I felt the sting again, but I also felt something new, a small spark of determination. I carried the cardigan I had bought for Donald back into the kitchen and set it on the table. I sat down in the same chair where I had read his text that morning. The coffee was cold, the plate still empty, but my mind was turning. I pulled out my recipe box, the one with years of handwritten cards. Some were faded, some had stains from gravy or pie filling, but each one carried a piece of family history. I flipped through them slowly, cornbread stuffing from my mother, pecan pie from my sister-in-law, green bean casserole from a church friend long gone. For a moment, I thought about putting the box back in the drawer and walking away. I could have spent Thanksgiving alone with a frozen dinner, let Donald and Sophia have their day, and kept my head down like I always had. That was the easy way, the safe way. But as I sat there, the recipes spread out in front of me, I felt a shift inside. These cards weren't just paper. They were proof that I had been the one holding things together all these years. I had been the one cooking, organizing, showing up. My fingerprints were all over every holiday memory. And I realized something clear as day. They might have uninvited me, but they couldn't erase me. That's when the thought came again, stronger this time. If they won't give me a seat, I'll set my own table. Not just a table for me, and a couple of cousins squeezed into a corner. A real table. Big, wide, welcoming. A table where everyone cut out by Donald and Sophia would have a place. I thought of the estate outside Charleston, the one I inherited from my brother, David. He had built it up after years working in construction, a 6,000 square foot colonial home with white columns and wide porches. When he passed, I kept it, though I only stayed there on rare weekends. It was too large for one woman, and honestly, I hadn't known what to do with it. But maybe now I did. I imagined the dining room, the long polished table, the high ceilings. I pictured chairs lined up down both sides, kids running through the hallways, cousins gathered around the fireplace. For the first time that day, the heaviness in my chest began to lift. Of course, doubt tried to creep in. I'm 67 years old. Did I really have the energy to pull this off? 30-plus people, meals, logistics. It sounded impossible. But then I thought about Donald's text. Hope you understand. I thought about all the times I had been expected to understand, to step back, to make room for others while my own seat was taken away. No, not this time. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number of a local chef I'd hired once for a church fundraiser. Matteo. He was young but talented, with a heart for community. I hesitated for only a second before pressing call. He answered on the second ring. "This is Matteo." "Matteo, it's Joyce Campbell," I said. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "I have a favor to ask." "A big one." There was a pause, then a warm chuckle. "What do you need, Miss Campbell?" "I'd like to host Thanksgiving dinner at my estate in Ravenel for 35 people. I took a breath and added, "and I'd like it to feel like home. Nothing fancy, just real food, and enough of it." Matteo whistled softly. "That's quite an undertaking on short notice." "I know," I replied, straightening in my chair. "But I think it's time for a new tradition, one where nobody gets left out." He didn't laugh at me. He didn't tell me it couldn't be done. Instead, he said, "All right, let's make it happen. I'll work up a menu and call you back tonight." When I hung up the phone, I sat very still for a moment. The weight of the day was still there, but underneath it was something else, calm, steady, certain. I gathered the recipe cards into a neat stack. Some of them I'd hand to Matteo, others I'd keep for myself. Either way, they'd be on the table. My family's food, my family's history. I thought about the people who would come. Karen and her parents, my cousins, nieces and nephews, friends who had no place else to go. Every single one of them would walk through those wide front doors and sit down at a table that said, "You belong here." And maybe, just maybe, when the day came, I'd sit at the head of that table. Not because I needed to show off, but because I had earned it. I leaned back in my chair, a quiet smile tugging at my lips. "If they won't give me a seat," I said out loud, "I'll set my own table, bigger, longer, and with everyone welcome." The words filled the room, strong and sure. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was the one writing the story. Would you have the courage to do the same? Subscribe if you'd build your own table. If you wouldn't, tell us in the comments. Maybe you'll find out why others disagree. After I hung up with Matteo, the kitchen felt lighter. For the first time all day, I had a plan. But once the excitement settled, I knew I needed something more than recipes and phone calls. I needed strength to see this through. Hosting a Thanksgiving for 35 people wasn't just cooking a bigger meal. It was standing up after years of being pushed down. I walked slowly to the back bedroom, the one I rarely went into. In the corner sat a cedar chest, the kind with a heavy lid and brass hinges. It had been sitting there for years, gathering dust. I hadn't opened it since before Donald married Sophia. I used to tell myself there was no point in digging through the past, but that afternoon I felt pulled to it. The chest smelled faintly of cedar when I lifted the lid. Inside were boxes, envelopes, old albums stacked one on top of another. My own private record of a life, lived half in the spotlight, half in the shadows. I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out the first album. The pages were stiff. I turned them slowly. There was Donald as a boy, grinning with his front teeth missing. Birthday parties where the cake was lopsided because I made it after working a double shift. Christmas mornings where he wore pajamas I had sewn myself. Those photos warmed me, reminded me of the bond we once had. But mixed in were memories that stung. A picture from a Thanksgiving about 15 years ago. Sophia's parents sat in the middle of the frame, smiling like they owned the holiday. I was off to the side, half-cropped, holding a plate no one seemed to notice. At the time, I told myself it didn't matter. But looking at it now, the truth was clear. I had been treated like a guest in my own family's story. I closed the album and pulled out an envelope. Inside were holiday cards, some from my own friends, others from family. One caught my eye, a card from Donald and Sophia the year their first child was born. The picture showed the baby in a matching outfit with Sophia's whole family gathered around. On the back, in neat handwriting, it said, "Our first Christmas together." Not a single mention of me. I had bought gifts that year, baked cookies, decorated my house for their visit, and yet when they sent out cards, I wasn't part of the together they were celebrating. I felt the sting again, but I kept going. At the bottom of the chest, I found a small box. Inside were notes I had written to myself over the years. I had kept them, almost like evidence for my own sanity. Little scraps of paper where I jotted down moments I didn't want to forget, not because they were good, but because they hurt so much I needed proof I hadn't imagined them. One read, "Easter Sunday. Donald and Sophia left right after lunch to go to her parents. Didn't help clean up. Didn't ask if I was okay." Another said, "Donald forgot my birthday. Called 2 days later after Sophia reminded him." Another bought quilt for grandson. Sophia's mother thanked for it. Donald said nothing. I held those scraps in my hand, feeling both sadness and clarity. These weren't small things. They were pieces of a pattern. Proof that I had been second choice for years. Proof that I had mattered less once Sophia's family took center stage. But as I sat there with the papers spread across my lap, something changed. Instead of feeling crushed, I felt steady. These notes weren't just evidence of my pain. They were reminders that I had survived every slight. I had kept showing up, kept loving, kept giving, and that meant I could keep standing now. I closed the small box and placed it back inside the chest. Then I reached for another folder I had almost forgotten. Inside were letters Donald had written as a boy, crayon drawings that said, "Love you, Mom." Notes from summer camp where he signed off, "Miss you, can't wait to come home." I read through them slowly, and my eyes filled with tears. Donald had loved me once without hesitation. Before life got complicated, before other voices grew louder, somewhere inside, that little boy was still there. I held onto that thought like a rope in deep water. I put everything back carefully, then closed the lid of the cedar chest. My hands pressed against the wood, and I spoke out loud, steady and sure. This box doesn't hold just pain. It holds proof that I kept going, and now I'll keep going again. I stood up taller as I left the room. The hurt was still there, but it didn't weigh me down. It fueled me. Each photo, each note, each card was another reason to set that new table, to show my family and myself that I was not invisible, not disposable. By the time I walked back to the kitchen, the decision felt unshakable. The recipes, the phone call with Mateo, the cedar chest, it all came together. Thanksgiving was going to happen at my estate, and it was going to be a feast where nobody was left out. I looked around the kitchen one more time, the sunlight catching on the countertop, and said softly, "This year will be different." And I meant it. Once I closed the cedar chest and walked back to the kitchen, I knew there was no turning back. The plan was set in my heart. Now it was time to put it into motion. The next morning, I drove out to the estate in Ravenel. It had been months since I last walked through those tall white doors. The house sat on acres of old oak trees, their branches stretching wide, draped with Spanish moss. My brother David had loved this land, and I felt him close as I turned the key in the lock. The inside smelled faintly of wood polish and cedar. The caretaker, Mr. Lewis, kept it in good shape, but it still needed a woman's touch to feel alive. I stood in the entry hall and pictured what it could look like, cousins spilling in with coats and casseroles, children running up the staircase, laughter bouncing off the high ceilings. It wasn't empty anymore in my mind. I started with the guest rooms. There were 6 of them, each with tall windows and 4-poster beds. I opened the curtains letting light flood in, then smoothed fresh quilts across each mattress. I placed small lavender sachets on the pillows, just like my mother used to. For the children, I set out little baskets of toys, puzzles, coloring books, soft stuffed animals. For the older relatives, I added extra blankets and tucked slippers at the foot of the bed. These weren't just rooms. They were places of welcome. By noon, Karen arrived to help. She carried a notebook and a pen, her face flushed with energy. "All right, Aunt Joyce," she said, "let's make this happen." We walked room to room, jotting down what still needed to be done. In the dining hall, we counted chairs. 35 people would need a long table, so we decided to line up 3 together, cover them with white cloths, and place centerpieces of pine cones and autumn leaves. I had already ordered personalized place cards from a local calligrapher. They arrived in a neat stack, each name written in ink that shimmered faintly when held to the light. I ran my finger over the raised letters. Uncle Jim, Cousin Rose, Karen, Michael, Rachel, each one reminded me of the faces I wanted to see at that table. At the very top of the stack were 3 cards that made my chest tighten: Donald, Sophia, and the boys. I set them aside for a moment, unsure where they belonged. In the kitchen, Chef Mateo came by to go over the menu. He spread papers across the counter. "I've got turkey, ham, cornbread stuffing, mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, pies. But I want to add some of your family's recipes. That cranberry relish you mentioned, the sweet potato casserole." I nodded, grateful. "It needs to taste like home." He smiled. "Then it will." The house hummed with life as we worked. Karen made phone calls to relatives, spreading the word. Mateo ordered ingredients. I moved from room to room, straightening, cleaning, preparing. The day passed in a blur of motion, but under it all, a quiet joy grew. That evening, just as I was folding napkins in the dining hall, my phone rang. The screen lit up with Donald's name. My stomach dropped. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. But I pressed answer. "Mom," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing?" I kept my tone calm. "I'm preparing Thanksgiving dinner." He let out a sharp breath. "You're embarrassing us. Everyone's talking. Sophia's parents heard you're hosting your own thing, and they think you're trying to compete." I folded another napkin slowly, steadying myself. "I'm not competing, Donald. I'm making sure the people you cut out have a place to go." "You need to cancel it," he snapped. "This isn't right." That's when the cold clarity settled over me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I simply spoke the truth in a way he couldn't ignore. "Cancel it," I said softly. "Oh, honey, I would never do that. In fact, I've already set a place for you, Sophia, and the boys. Right at the head of the table. You're still invited." There was silence on the line, just the sound of his breathing. "But," I continued, "if you don't want those seats, I'll gladly give them to the nice family from the shelter who'd be thankful for them." The words came calm and sweet, but they carried a sting. It wasn't cruel, but it wasn't perfectly kind either. It was the truth. Donald stammered. "Mom, why would you say that?" "Because I've spent too many years letting myself be pushed aside." I said, "I won't do it anymore. You're welcome at my table, but you don't get to decide. Who else belongs there?" Another long pause. Then his voice dropped. "Sophia's not going to like this." I almost smiled. Sophia doesn't have to. Thanksgiving isn't just hers to control. We ended the call without agreement. My hand shook a little as I set the phone down, but I didn't regret a word. For once, I had spoken from a place of strength, not fear. Karen walked in just then, holding a box of candles. She saw my face and tilted her head. "Was that Donald?" "Yes," I said simply. "And he knows where his seats are if he wants them." She nodded, her eyes shining with quiet pride. That night, As I placed the last napkin and smoothed the tablecloth, I looked at the 3 cards with Donald's family's names. I set them at the head of the table, not because I expected him to show, but because I wanted him to know the choice was his. For once, the power wasn't in his hands. It was in mine. And for the first time in years, I felt steady enough to carry it. Do you see the strength in saving seats for people who don't value you? If that hit you, like this video and subscribe. Thanksgiving morning came with an unexpected chill in the air. The news had been talking about a rare cold front moving down from the north, and by sunrise, the sky over Charleston was heavy with gray clouds. I stood on the wide porch of the estate, pulling my sweater tight, and I could almost smell snow in the wind. Snow in November was nearly unheard of here, but that morning, it felt possible. Inside, the house was alive. The ovens were already warm, filling the rooms with the smell of roasting turkey and cinnamon pies. Chef Mateo had his team moving like clockwork in the kitchen, and Karen was darting back and forth with her notebook, checking off lists. I walked through the halls, pausing in each room to make sure every detail was ready. Quilts on the beds, toys in the baskets, place cards lined neatly at the long table. By mid-morning, the first car pulled up the driveway. My cousin Rachel and her husband stepped out, followed by their 3 children. The youngest, eyes wide as saucers, looked up at the big white columns. "Is this a castle, Grandma Joyce?" she asked, running up the steps. I laughed and bent down to her level. "Not a castle, sweetheart, just a big old house. But today it's ours." Soon after, more cars began to arrive. Aunt Rose, carrying her famous pound cake. Uncle Jim, lugging a cooler full of sweet tea. Cousins, nieces, nephews. One by one they came, shaking off the cold, their faces lighting up when they stepped inside. The rooms that had sat quiet for years suddenly overflowed with laughter and voices. Children raced up the staircase, sliding down the banisters, while the adults hugged and filled the foyer with warmth. I walked through the crowd, my heart swelling. Every smile reminded me why I had chosen to do this. No one was standing at the edge of the room. No one was left out. Around noon, I slipped into the dining hall to check on the place settings. 35 names stretched across the long table, and each card gleamed in the soft light. At the head, I placed the 3 cards that still made my chest ache: Donald, Sophia, and the boys. The seat sat empty, waiting. Just then, Karen came rushing in, phone in hand. "Aunt Joyce," she said, frowning, "look at this." She held out her screen. Sophia had posted a photo of her own table, already set, captioned, "So, blessed to have a real Thanksgiving with family that matters. Hashtag family first, hashtag grateful." I stared at the words. Real Thanksgiving. Family that matters. It stung, but I didn't let it show. "Let her post," I said calmly. "We'll make our own memories here." Karen nodded, but I could see the anger in her eyes. She slid her phone back into her pocket and helped me light the candles on the sideboard. By 2 o'clock, the feast was ready. Mateo carried the first turkey to the table, golden and steaming. Platters of roasted vegetables, bowls of mashed potatoes, baskets of cornbread. The spread was endless. We gathered everyone in the dining hall, the children bouncing in their seats, the adults settling with smiles. I stood for a moment, looking down the length of the table. 32 faces, each one glowing with anticipation. My voice caught, but I managed to say, "I'm glad you're all here. Today, nobody's forgotten. Today, everyone has a seat." Applause broke out, and the meal began. The sound of laughter and clinking silverware filled the room. I passed plates down the table, helped the children with their food, and listened to stories that floated from one end to the other. It felt like family the way it was meant to be. Then, just as Uncle Jim stood to make a toast, the lights flickered. Once, twice. Then everything went dark. Gasps rose around the table. A few children squealed. The wind howled outside, and the windows rattled in their frames. "It's the storm," Mateo called from the kitchen. "Power's out across the county." For a moment, silence fell heavy in the dark. Then I reached for the basket of candles we had set aside, and Karen struck a match. Soft light flickered across the table. Soon more candles were lit, their glow dancing against the walls. Someone pulled out their phone flashlight, then another. And then, from somewhere near the middle of the table, a voice began to sing. A slow, steady hymn. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound. Others joined in, one by one, until the room was filled with voices rising together. I sat back and listened, my eyes wet. In that candlelight, with the storm raging outside, the warmth in that room was stronger than any electricity could provide. Children leaned against their parents, cousins held hands, uncles and aunts swayed gently as they sang. For 20 minutes, we ate by candlelight, laughing and humming, sharing food and stories. When the generator finally kicked in and the lights blinked back on, a few people sighed, almost disappointed. The darkness had brought us closer, made us feel something real that no post or picture could capture. Later, as the snow began to fall outside, a rare, soft white blanket over Charleston, I thought about Donald and Sophia. They were probably sitting at their polished table, just the few of them, lights humming, plates full. But what did they have? A quiet room, a picture-perfect setting with no laughter spilling out, no hymns sung in the dark, no cousins chasing each other through the halls. I looked around at the 35 people in my dining hall and realized something with perfect clarity. They thought uninviting us would take something away, but all it did was give us the chance to build something better. By the time the storm quieted down and the generator hummed back to life, the house was filled with the smell of pies warming in the oven and coffee brewing on the stove. People lingered at the table long after their plates were cleared, still laughing and sharing stories in the glow of the candles we hadn't yet blown out. I was clearing dishes when Karen slipped her phone out and began snapping pictures. She caught one of the table lined with candles, faces glowing in the soft light. She took another of the children curled up under quilts by the fireplace, and one of Uncle Jim leading everyone in a hymn while the snow drifted outside the window. She showed me the photos. "Aunt Joyce, people need to see this," she said. I hesitated. I've never been one to put my private life online, but when I looked at those pictures, I realized they told a story all on their own. A story of togetherness, of laughter, of what family can look like when nobody's left out. So I nodded. "Go ahead." Within an hour, Karen had posted a series of pictures with the caption, 35 strong. Everyone welcome. The best Thanksgiving we've had in years. At first, the comments trickled in slowly. Friends from church, neighbors, old classmates. "This looks beautiful." Now, that's what Thanksgiving is about. Then more came. "This looks like the real Thanksgiving. Wish I was there." "Joyce, you did something special." By the next morning, the posts had spread through our hometown circles. People began sharing them on their own pages. Someone even made a side-by-side comparison. Karen's photo of our glowing candlelit table, lined with 35 people, against Sophia's picture of her small gathering. Just a handful of them around a stiff, polished table. The caption, "So blessed to have a real Thanksgiving with family that matters." The contrast couldn't have been clearer. Our table overflowed with warmth. Their table looked bare, cold, and empty. Comments poured in beneath the comparison. Which family looks happier here? The Campbells know how to do Thanksgiving. Funny how the ones left out ended up with the better day. By noon, my phone was buzzing nonstop with messages. Cousins I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, even people from church I barely spoke to were writing things like, "Joyce, you showed what true family means." I didn't post anything myself. I didn't need to. The photos spoke for me. Around 2 o'clock, my phone rang again. Donald. For a moment, I thought about letting it go to voicemail, but I answered. Mom. He started, his voice sharp. What are you trying to do? I'm not trying to do anything, I said, keeping my tone even. You're making us look bad. He snapped. People aren't talking. Sophia's parents saw that post. They said it's humiliating. Everyone thinks we excluded you, and now you're parading around like a victim. I stood at the window, looking out at the blanket of snow covering the yard. Children's footprints still trailed across it from the night before. Their laughter still echoed in my ears. Donald, I said quietly, I didn't need to make you look bad. You did that yourself. There was silence on the other end. You cut out 17 people. I continued. You told me I didn't have a seat at your table. I didn't complain. I didn't argue. I simply set another table. If people see the difference, that's not on me. That's on you. His breathing grew heavier. Mom, you don't understand what Sophia's dealing with. She wanted something small with her family. It wasn't personal. Not personal. My voice cracked, but I held it steady. Donald, when you send your own mother a message saying she's not welcome, it's as personal as it gets. He didn't answer right away. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the way they always did when he didn't have a quick excuse. Finally, he said, Sophia's furious. She says you embarrassed her. I almost laughed. She embarrassed herself. I didn't post her caption about real family. She did that. If people compare, that's on her. Mom, he started, but I cut him off. No, Donald. You've been telling me to understand for years. Understand why birthdays were missed. Understand why her parents always came first. Understand why I was always at the end of the table. Well, now it's your turn to understand. You made a choice. I made mine. And I don't regret it. The line was quiet for a long moment. Then he muttered, I'll talk to you later, and hung up. I set the phone down, my hand steady. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of his disapproval pressing on me. Instead, I felt free. Later that evening, Karen came in with her phone. Aunt Joyce, you should see this, she said, grinning. She showed me dozens more comments. People I didn't even know were sharing the photos. Some wrote things like, that's what holidays should look like. Others said, Joyce Campbell knows how to host a real Thanksgiving. I shook my head, a little overwhelmed. I didn't do this for attention. Karen smiled. I know. That's why it means so much. I went to bed that night with the glow of candlelight still in my memory. Not just the candles on the table, but the light in people's faces. I had seen something in them I hadn't seen in years. Connection, belonging, joy. And no amount of online chatter could take that away. Still, I knew one thing for certain. The fallout had only just begun. 2 days after Thanksgiving, I was back in my Charleston house. The estate was quiet again, cleaned up after the gathering. I thought I'd finally have a chance to rest, but life had other plans. It was a Saturday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I peeked through the window, I saw Donald and Sophia standing on the porch with the boys. Donald carried a box, and Sophia clutched a photo album tight to her chest. My stomach knotted, but I opened the door. This is a surprise, I said evenly. Donald tried to smile. We thought we'd stop by. I stepped aside, and they walked in. The boys headed straight to the couch, already bickering over who would hold the tablet. Sophia sat down carefully, placing the album on the coffee table. Donald set the box beside it. Karen happened to be visiting that morning, helping me with some leftovers. She came in from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and froze when she saw them. I gave her a small nod to stay. Sophia opened the album. We found some old pictures, she said, her tone softer than usual. Thought you might like them. I leaned forward. The first photo showed Donald as a baby in a stroller, his father pushing from behind. Another showed his first day of school. They had chosen carefully, filling the pages with moments meant to soften me. But then my grandson, the older of the two, looked up from the couch. His voice was clear and simple. "Grandma, your house was better. It was more fun. That's where the whole family was." Sophia stiffened. Donald's eyes darted to his son, then back to me. He forced a laugh. "Kids say funny things." Karen stepped closer, her voice calm but firm. "It's not just kids saying things, Donald. Your mom has always been the one holding this family together. She never missed a school play. She drove you to baseball when your dad couldn't. She even helped you cover rent in college when you were short. She's always been the center. You just chose to stop seeing it." The room went quiet. Donald's face flushed. He looked down at the box he'd brought, then opened it. Inside were odds and ends, birthday cards, school certificates, little notes I'd written him as a boy. He lifted one out, a card with my handwriting on the front. "Proud of you, love, Mom." "I didn't forget everything," he said softly, almost defensive. I stood and walked to the hallway, returning with a smaller box of my own, the one from the cedar chest. I set it beside his. "I kept mine too," I said. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This one says, 'Donald forgot my birthday. Called 2 days later after Sophia reminded him.'" I set it on the table. "This one, Donald and Sophia left Easter lunch early to go to her parents. Didn't ask if I was okay." Another slip joined the pile. Donald's eyes dropped to the papers. "Mom, that's not fair." "It's not about fair," I replied, my voice steady. "It's about truth. For years I kept these notes, so I wouldn't think I was imagining things. I wasn't imagining them, Donald. I was living them." Sophia crossed her arms. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "Maybe not," I said, looking her in the eye. "But you did. And then you doubled down with that text." My grandson spoke up again, innocent and honest. "Grandma's house had singing and candles. We don't sing at our house. It was better." Sophia's face tightened. She reached for the album again, as if flipping the pages could erase what had just been said. Donald rubbed his forehead, looking tired. "Mom, I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," Karen told him, her voice softer now, but still firm. "You just need to see it. Really see it. Your mother has always been here. You chose to put blinders on." I folded my hands in my lap. "I don't need an apology, Donald. I don't even need your approval. But I do need respect. And last week, I finally realized I can live without your table, but you can't take mine away from me." For a long moment, nobody spoke. The boys had gone quiet, sensing the tension. Sophia stared at the album without turning the page. Donald sat back, the fight gone from his shoulders. Finally, he said quietly, "I'll think about it." "That's all I ask," I answered. They left a short while later, carrying their album and their silence with them. Karen stayed, helping me clear the coffee table. She placed her hand on mine. "You did good, Aunt Joyce. You didn't let them twist it. You stood your ground." I nodded, though my chest ached. It wasn't easy facing your own child that way. But as I watched them drive off, I knew the truth had finally been laid bare. Between my grandson's honesty, Karen's words, and the evidence I had kept all these years, Donald couldn't deny it anymore. And whether he admitted it today or 10 years from now, the message was the same. I had always been the one holding the family together. And I wasn't invisible anymore. The weeks after Thanksgiving passed slower than I expected. The snow melted, the estate was quiet again, and I had time to sit with what had happened. Some nights, I wondered if I had been too firm with Donald, too sharp with my words. But then I remembered his text, the one that started it all, and I knew I had done what needed to be done. By mid-December, I decided to send out an invitation for Christmas dinner at the estate. I didn't know who would come, but I wanted to keep the doors open. To my surprise, Donald and Sophia replied first. A simple message, "We'll be there." I read it twice, trying to decide what it meant. Were they coming to make peace, or just to keep up appearances? Either way, I knew I had to be ready. Christmas Day arrived crisp and clear, the kind of winter morning where the air feels sharp in your lungs. I stood on the porch of the estate again, this time with garlands draped along the railings and a tall tree glowing through the front window. One by one, the family arrived, their cars crunching over the gravel drive. And then Donald's car pulled in. He stepped out first, carrying a dish of sweet potato casserole. Sophia followed, holding the youngest boy's hand. The older one carried a wrapped present almost bigger than he was. They walked toward me slowly, but when they reached the steps, I smiled and said, simply, "Welcome." Inside, the dining room looked different from Thanksgiving. This time, I had asked the tables to be set in a large circle. No head of the table, no one at the end. Everyone sat equal, side by side. People found their seats, chatting and laughing as they settled in. Donald placed his dish on the sideboard, then sat down beside his boys. Sophia slid into the chair next to him, her face unreadable. Dinner began with quiet conversation. Plates passed around, glasses clinked, and slowly the room filled with the same warmth I'd felt at Thanksgiving. The boys laughed with their cousins, piling their plates with ham and biscuits. My niece Karen shared stories from her childhood, and the uncles teased each other as always. At one point, I noticed Sophia watching me. She caught my eye, then leaned closer. Her voice was low, meant only for me. "I need to tell you something," she said. "I've felt threatened by you. From the beginning. You had such a strong place in Donald's life, and I thought if I didn't push, there wouldn't be room for me." Her words surprised me, but I kept my tone gentle. "Sophia, there was always room for you. I just never expected there wouldn't be room for me too." She looked down at her plate, her voice softer still. "I see that now. For a long time, neither of us said anything more. But I could feel the first crack in the wall she had built between us. Later in the evening, after dessert was served and coffee was poured, Donald stood. He cleared his throat, looking around the circle of faces. "I want to say something," he began. His voice wavered, but he pressed on. "Mom, I wasn't fair to you. I let things get in the way. But seeing everyone here tonight, I realize you're the one who brought this family back together. Thank you." His words settled over the table like a blessing. I didn't need a long apology. Those few sentences were enough. I looked around at the circle, cousins laughing, children playing, elders smiling. The family I thought I'd lost had come together stronger than before. And I realized something I never had before. Being left out of their table gave me the strength to create one of my own. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even about proving a point anymore. It was about finally understanding my own worth. When the evening wound down, I walked out to the porch as the cars pulled away. The boys ran back to hug me, their cheeks red from the cold. Donald shook my hand, then hugged me tight, something he hadn't done in years. Sophia met my eyes, gave a small nod, and whispered, "Merry Christmas." I watched their car drive off into the night, the headlights disappearing down the road. The estate was quiet again, but this time it felt full. I turned back inside, the glow of the Christmas tree lighting the hall, and felt peace settle over me. And now, as I share this with you, I want to leave you with a question. Have you ever been pushed aside, only to discover your own strength? What would you do? Shrink away or build a bigger table? If this story spoke to you, don't forget to like, share, and leave a comment below. I'd love to hear your own experiences. And be sure to subscribe to the channel because more stories are coming your way.